In 1917, the city of Cincinnati renamed its streets. Not for urban planning reasons, not because the old names were confusing or outdated, because the old names were German. Berlin Street became Woodrow Street. German Street became English Street. And across the city, across the country, a wave of anti-German hysteria was systematically erasing any visible trace of German culture from American public life. Sauerkraut was renamed Liberty Cabbage. German measles became Liberty Measles. Hamburg steak became Salisbury steak, a name it still carries today. The Frankfurter, the Frank, the worst in a bun, found itself at the center of the most absurd food renaming campaign in American history. In New York, vendors began calling them Red Hots. In other cities, Liberty sausages. The War Department briefly banned the word Frankfurter from military mess halls. A sausage that had been woven into the fabric of American food culture for decades was suddenly enemy food, German food, suspicious food. The hot dog did not disappear. By the end of the war, it was more popular than it had been before. It survived a government-backed campaign to erase its name, a second wave of German hysteria in World War II, a century of food safety scandals about what was actually in it, and a dietary revolution that declared processed meat a public health risk. Today, Americans consume approximately 20 billion hot dogs per year. 20 billion. That is roughly 70 hot dogs for every man, woman, and child in the country, every single year. They are sold in baseball stadiums, in convenience stores, from street carts, at backyard barbecues, and at 4th of July celebrations, where the most patriotically American food on the table is, in its origins, almost entirely German. The hot dog is one of the great American contradictions, a food simultaneously reviled for what it contains and beloved for what it represents. A food that began in the butcher's workshops of 19th century Germany and Frankfurt, crossed an ocean to become the defining street food of American cities, survived 2 wars on its name, made its way into the hands of every American president who has ever eaten at a baseball game, and somehow became a symbol of American innocence and summer and national identity so powerful that no amount of ingredient disclosure has been able to diminish it. This is that story. The hot dog is a sausage, and the sausage is one of the oldest food technologies in human history. The word sausage derives from the Latin salsus, meaning salted, and salt is the key. Sausage was invented not as a luxury food, but as a survival technology, a way of using the parts of slaughtered animals that could not otherwise be preserved long enough to be safely consumed. When a pig or a cow or a sheep was slaughtered in the ancient world, the prime cuts, the muscles, the joints could be dried, smoked, or salted to extend their usability. But the offal, the scraps, the fat, the blood, the organs, these spoiled quickly and could not easily be preserved in their natural form. Grinding them together with salt and spices and packing them tightly into the natural casing of the animal's cleaned intestines created a compressed, dense product that preserved far better than the individual ingredients. Salt inhibits bacterial growth. The casing protects the interior from contamination. The density of the packed meat reduces the exposure of interior surfaces to oxygen. The result was a product that could last in the right conditions for days or weeks longer than the individual ingredients. The earliest written reference to sausage appears in Homer's Odyssey, written approximately 750 BC, where a stomach filled with fat and blood being cooked over a fire is described in a context that makes clear it was a familiar food, something ordinary enough to appear in a poem without explanation. The ancient Sumerians produced sausage-like products 5,000 years ago. Ancient Chinese culinary texts from 589 BC reference a sausage made from goat and lamb meat. Rome institutionalized the sausage. Roman butchers, the Lanius, produced a range of sausage products sold throughout the empire. Lucanica, a pork sausage named for the Lucania region of southern Italy, was so popular in ancient Rome that it is still made and sold in Italy today under the name Luganega, with a recipe that has changed little in 2,000 years. Roman soldiers carried sausage as field rations on campaign. The sausage fed the army that built the empire. The Roman Emperor Constantine, who converted the empire to Christianity in the 4th century AD, briefly banned sausages, specifically blood sausages, on the grounds that their production was associated with pagan religious rituals. Like coffee bans and soap taxes, the prohibition was imperfectly enforced and largely ineffective. People continued making sausages. The emperor moved on. The specific ancestor of the hot dog emerged in the Germanic butchering tradition that developed through the medieval period, a tradition built on preserving pork through smoking, salting, and encasing in a way that produced a range of products recognizable today. The Frankfurt Würstchen, the Frankfurt sausage, and the Wiener Wurst, the Viennese sausage, were both claiming, by the 17th century, to be the original cooked, smoked, finely ground pork sausage in a natural casing that would eventually become the hot dog. This dispute between Frankfurt and Vienna over who invented the hot dog's ancestor continues to this day with the cheerful intensity of a disagreement that both sides know cannot be definitively resolved and neither side particularly wants to end. The hot dog arrived in America in the waves of German immigration that reshaped American cities in the 19th century. Between 1820 and 1920, approximately 6 million Germans immigrated to the United States, making Germans the single largest non-English-speaking immigrant group in American history. They settled primarily in the Midwest, in cities like Cincinnati, St. Louis, Milwaukee, and Chicago, and in the urban centers of the East Coast. They brought with them their food culture, beer gardens, delicatessens, pretzels, sauerkraut, pumpernickel, and sausages of every description. The German butchering tradition produced American delicatessens and meat markets that sold a range of sausage products to both German immigrant communities and the broader American population that quickly discovered a taste for them. Frankfurters, the Frankfurt-style smoked sausage, were among the most popular. The innovation that transformed the Frankfurter from an immigrant food into an American icon was a simple act of convenience. Someone put it in a bun. The exact moment this happened is, like most pivotal moments in culinary history, surrounded by competing legends. At least 3 different origin stories have been proposed with varying degrees of historical support. The most widely circulated story involves Charles Feltman, a German-born baker who began selling hot dogs from a pushcart on Coney Island in 1867, supposedly after realizing that a small bread roll, a slight modification to his usual baking, made it possible for customers to hold and eat a hot sausage without burning their fingers or requiring a plate and fork. Feltman eventually opened a restaurant that became a major attraction, but the evidence that Feltman specifically invented the bread-bun combination is limited. The competing story involves Anton Feuchtwanger, a Bavarian sausage vendor at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, who supposedly loaned white gloves to customers to hold the hot sausages without burning their hands, and when most customers walked away still wearing the gloves, switched to small bread rolls as a more economical solution. Again, the documentation is thin. A third origin story places the hot dog bun's invention at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, at a sausage stand run by Antoine Feuchtwanger's brother, or perhaps a different vendor named Antonin Feuchtwanger, or perhaps someone else entirely. What the competing stories suggest is that the hot dog bun was not a single invention so much as an obvious solution that multiple vendors independently arrived at within the same general period, in the context of the rapid urbanization and street food culture of Gilded Age American cities. Cities were growing. Workers needed fast, cheap, portable food. A cooked sausage in a bun was the perfect answer. The man who made the hot dog nationally famous was not a German immigrant. He was a Czech-born businessman named Harry Stevens, who in 1901 began selling hot dogs at New York's Polo Grounds baseball stadium, where his vendors walked through the stands shouting, "Get your red hots." The combination of baseball and hot dogs was, from this moment, essentially inseparable. Harry M. Stevens is also central to one of the most repeated and almost certainly false stories in hot dog history, that the name hot dog was coined by sports cartoonist Tad Dorgan, who in 1902 supposedly attended a cold baseball game at the Polo Grounds, saw Stevens vendors selling red hots from warming containers, couldn't spell Dachshund, the breed of dog whose elongated shape the sausage resembled, and so wrote hot dog in the caption instead. This story is almost certainly apocryphal. The phrase hot dog appears in student newspapers and other sources before 1902. But the story persists because it has the character of a good origin myth. It's specific, it's funny, and it explains something people are genuinely curious about. The name hot dog stuck regardless of who first used it, and by the early 20th century, hot dogs were everywhere. By 1917, when the United States entered World War I, the hot dog Sauerkraut, under its various names of Frankfurter, Frank, and Wiener, was one of the most widely consumed foods in the country. It was the defining food of baseball, of Coney Island, of street carts in every major American city. Its German immigrant origins were well known and largely unremarked upon. Then the war changed everything. The anti-German sentiment that swept through American society after the United States declared war in April 1917 was not simply patriotic enthusiasm. It was organized, government-backed, and in many cases, violent. The Committee on Public Information, a federal propaganda agency created by President Wilson, produced material depicting German culture as fundamentally barbaric. German Americans were pressured to demonstrate their loyalty through conspicuous renunciations of German cultural identity. The food renaming campaigns, Liberty cabbage for Sauerkraut, Salisbury steak for Hamburg steak, Liberty sausage for Frankfurter, were part of a broader attempt to purge German cultural identity from American public life. In some communities, speaking German in public was dangerous. German-language newspapers were shut down. German-American churches stopped holding services in German. The hot dog situation was complicated by the fact that its most common name, hot dog chow, was not obviously German and had already largely displaced Frankfurter in everyday American usage. The food survived the war under its American name, while the German origin names were stigmatized. The pattern repeated in World War II. In 1941, as the United States entered the war against Germany for the second time in a generation, Frankfurter was again a word Americans were uncomfortable with, but by this time, hot dog had been the dominant term for decades. The food survived the second naming crisis more easily than the first. What the war years revealed in retrospect was something important about the nature of American food culture. Immigrant foods, the foods that German, Italian, Chinese, Jewish, Polish, and countless other immigrant communities brought to America, do not stay immigrant foods. They enter the general American food culture, take on American names, get adapted to American tastes and American production methods, and eventually become so thoroughly American that their origins become a historical footnote rather than a present identity. The hot dog is the most complete example of this transformation. A German butchering tradition, an immigrant street food, a Gilded Age convenience food, all of it compressed into something that Americans in the 21st century consider as fundamentally their own, as baseball and the 4th of July. The food survived 2 wars on its name because the name had already become American before the wars started. This is the part of the hot dog's history that most people know is coming and most people would prefer to skip. The ingredients of a commercial hot dog are, by design, not transparent. The U.S. Department of Agriculture regulates hot dog production and requires specific labeling. A hot dog labeled beef Frankfurter must contain at least a certain percentage of beef skeletal muscle meat and cannot exceed certain limits of fat and water. A hot dog labeled simply Frankfurter can contain a blend of beef, pork, chicken, and turkey. A Frankfurter with byproducts, or Frankfurter with variety meats, less commonly sold today than in previous decades, could contain mechanically separated poultry, organ meat, and a range of other animal products. The specific contents of a commercial hot dog are determined by a process of economic optimization, using the cheapest acceptable combination of ingredients that produces a product that passes regulatory standards and tastes sufficiently like what consumers expect. The result is a food that is engineered as much as it is produced. The mechanically separated meat that appears in some hot dog varieties is particularly striking to examine. Mechanically separated poultry or pork is produced by forcing the carcass of a chicken or pig through a sieve under high pressure, straining the remaining flesh from the bones in a paste-like form. It is technically meat. It looks nothing like meat. Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel The Jungle, a muckraking novel set in Chicago's meatpacking district, is probably the most famous literary treatment of what goes into processed meat products. Sinclair's novel, which described conditions in the meat processing industry in graphic detail, including the accidental incorporation of workers who fell into rendering vats, was intended as a socialist critique of labor conditions. Its impact was almost entirely on food safety regulation rather than labor law. The public was horrified by what was going into the meat, not by the conditions of the workers producing it. Sinclair famously said of his novel's reception, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach." The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 and the Federal Meat Inspection Act of the same year were passed partly in response to public revulsion produced by The Jungle. They established federal oversight of meat processing and labeling requirements that have been updated and expanded ever since. The modern hot dog is a far more regulated, far more consistently produced food than the sausages of 1906. Whether it is a significantly more appetizing food in terms of its ingredient composition remains a matter of perspective. The hot dog's ingredient transparency problem reached its most extreme form in a 2015 viral marketing campaign by Clear Foods, a food analysis company, which conducted DNA testing on 345 different hot dog and sausage products from 75 brands purchased at major American retailers. Their findings: roughly 14% of all products contained ingredients not listed on the label. 2% of products labeled as beef or pork contained human DNA. Vegetarian products had the highest rate of mislabeling. About 67% contained meat not declared on the label. The public reaction was somewhere between outrage and exhausted laughter. Americans knew on some level that hot dogs were not what their best selves would choose to eat. The DNA testing simply confirmed it with a specificity that was hard to laugh off. Hot dog sales did not decline significantly after this news. They never have, after any revelation about ingredients. The hot dog survives every disclosure because what it represents, summer, baseball, childhood, simplicity, is more powerful than any amount of information about what it contains. If you're finding this video interesting, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The hot dog's position as America's most democratically accessible food has made it an irresistible political prop for every American president of the modern era. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served hot dogs to King George VI and Queen Elizabeth of Britain at Hyde Park in 1939, a casual outdoor meal that was, in its deliberate informality, a carefully calculated diplomatic statement about American egalitarianism. The image of a British king eating a hot dog at a picnic ran in newspapers worldwide and was read, correctly, as a message that America was a different kind of great power. One that served its guests in an undershirt at a picnic table rather than in formal state dining rooms. The king, by all accounts, enjoyed his hot dog and asked for seconds. Richard Nixon ate hot dogs at the Wrigley Field bleachers. Jimmy Carter ate them at a Georgia state fair. Ronald Reagan served them at Camp David. Bill Clinton's relationship with fast food in general and hot dogs in particular was extensively covered by an American press that understood that what a president ate communicated something about who they were or wanted to appear to be. Barack Obama was photographed eating a hot dog at a 4th of July celebration. Donald Trump served fast food, including hot dogs, to college sports championship teams visiting the White House, a choice that generated significant press coverage and significant controversy about what it said about America's relationship with food, hospitality, and presidential dignity. The hot dog is the only food that can be served by an American president to a foreign head of state as a deliberate act of national self-definition. It is the only food whose presence on a White House menu generates genuine political commentary. Because what the hot dog represents, the accessible, the populist, the democratic, the egalitarian, is itself a political statement about what America claims to be. This is the part that should make you think. The hot dog is not simply a food, it is a symbol system. And the symbol system was built on a foundation of German immigrant labor, a century of processing shortcuts, 2 wars on its name, and a viral DNA testing scandal, all of which the symbol system has absorbed and survived without diminishing. To understand the hot dog's cultural centrality in America, you have to understand Coney Island. And to understand Coney Island, you have to understand what it meant to be a poor person in a New York City tenement in the 1890s. Coney Island, at the southern tip of Brooklyn, was accessible by a nickel's worth of streetcar fare from the worst tenements of lower Manhattan. For a nickel, a factory worker, a garment worker, a dock worker, a new immigrant who had arrived speaking no English and owning nothing could be transported from the suffocating heat of the city in summer to the ocean, to the beach, to the rides and the food and the noise and the escape of Coney Island. And at Coney Island, for a few cents you could eat. Nathan Handwerker arrived from Poland in 1912, worked briefly for Charles Feltman's hot dog operation, and in 1916 opened his own hot dog stand with the specific strategic objective of underpricing Feltman. While Feltman charged a dime, which is not insignificant on a factory worker's daily wage, Nathan charged a nickel. Nathan's Famous was built on the democratic proposition that everyone deserved to eat well and cheaply. The nickel hot dog was not just an economic decision, it was a philosophical one. Nathan Handwerker, an Eastern European Jewish immigrant with no capital and a borrowed recipe, built one of the most recognizable food brands in America on the principle that good food should cost what working people could afford. The quality question, why would anyone trust a 5-cent hot dog in an era when adulteration of cheap food products was a genuine concern, was addressed by Nathan's wife Ida with characteristic directness. She reportedly hired men to stand near the cart wearing doctors' white coats and eating hot dogs, implying medical endorsement without actually claiming it. The stunt worked. Nathan's grew. Today, Nathan's Famous operates over 40,000 locations worldwide through franchise partnerships and a licensed retail business that distributes hot dogs to supermarkets across the United States. The company holds an annual hot dog eating contest at its original Coney Island location every 4th of July that has become one of the most watched competitive eating events in the world. A contest in which professional eaters consume more hot dogs in 10 minutes than most Americans eat in several months. The record, as of this writing, stands at 76 hot dogs and buns consumed in 10 minutes. By a single human being, on the 4th of July, in front of thousands of spectators and a national television audience. The hot dog economy, built on a 5-cent street food at the edge of Brooklyn in 1916, has produced something so culturally embedded that it holds its own national championship every Independence Day. The hot dog spread beyond America is one of the more quietly remarkable stories in the history of food globalization. In Japan, hot dogs exist in the specific form of what are called American dogs. Corn dogs, battered and deep-fried sausages on a stick, sold at convenience stores and festival stalls. The Japanese relationship with American food culture, mediated through the post-World War II occupation and the subsequent cultural influence of American popular culture, made hot dogs a signifier of Americanness that Japanese consumers adopted with enthusiasm. In South Korea, a form of corn dog stuffed with cheese and coated in rice flour batter, often rolled in sugar or crushed ramen noodles, emerged in the 2010s as a street food phenomenon that spread globally through social media. The Korean corn dog bore enough resemblance to its American ancestor to share a name and a concept while being culinarily something entirely different. a transformation so complete that hot dog purists and Korean corn dog enthusiasts sometimes dispute whether they are discussing the same food at all. In Germany, the country whose butchering tradition created the Frankfurter, hot dogs are consumed but are not the cultural institution they are in America. The German sausage culture is far more specific and more varied. The Bratwurst, the Weisswurst, the Currywurst, each with its own regional identity and its own cultural weight. The hot dog, as an American concept, is understood in Germany as an American adaptation of something German, which it is, though the adaptation is now so complete that the American version and the German original are essentially different foods. In Scandinavia, the pølse, a version of the hot dog served from kiosks called pølsevogn, is a genuine national institution in Denmark and Norway. The Danish hot dog, served in a steamed bun with a specific set of toppings including raw onion, crispy fried onion, remoulade, ketchup, and mustard, is one of the most consumed street foods in Scandinavia. It is as embedded in Danish food culture as the original Frankfurter is in German food culture. An immigrant food that crossed an ocean in an American form and then crossed back into Europe to find a new home in countries adjacent to the one that created it. The hot dog's global presence is, like so much of American cultural exports, a story of American mass culture carrying something beyond its borders, and that something arriving in new places in subtly but recognizably transformed versions. Today, the United States consumes approximately 20 billion hot dogs per year. The hot dog industry is worth roughly $7 billion annually in the United States alone. The global market is worth significantly more. The hot dog's ingredient content has, over the past several decades, become significantly more visible through improved labeling requirements. Most major brands now list their ingredients clearly and have reformulated products to reduce sodium, eliminate nitrites, and remove certain additives in response to consumer pressure. A clean label hot dog, one made from ingredients recognizable to a non-food scientist consumer, is now widely available in premium segments of the market. Whether the clean label hot dog addresses the fundamental issue, that a hot dog is still a processed meat product in which the choice of ingredients is determined primarily by economic optimization, is a question that depends on what you consider the fundamental issue. The hot dog has never pretended to be something it isn't. It is cheap, convenient, and made from parts of animals that wouldn't otherwise be consumed. It has been those things for its entire existence. The public health implications of regular processed meat consumption are now clearly established. The World Health Organization in 2015 classified processed meat, including hot dogs, as a Group 1 carcinogen, a substance for which there is sufficient evidence of a causal relationship with cancer in humans, not suspected, established. The specific risk is colorectal cancer, and the magnitude of the risk from moderate consumption is significant but not dramatic, roughly a 17% increased risk per 50 grams of processed meat consumed daily, which is about one hot dog. Hot dog sales did not decline after the WHO announcement. Americans ate 20 billion of them the year before the announcement and approximately 20 billion the year after. This tells you something about the hot dog's cultural position that no amount of nutritional or food safety information can change. The hot dog is not consumed primarily because of its ingredient qualities or its nutritional profile. It is consumed because of what it represents. Summer, baseball, the backyard grill, Coney Island in 1916, a nickel in a child's hand, and the smell of something cooking at a fair. It began as a survival technology, a way to use the parts of animals that would otherwise be wasted. It crossed an ocean as an immigrant food. It became the defining street food of the most powerful country in the world. It survived 2 wars, multiple food safety scandals, DNA testing, a WHO cancer classification, and every dietary movement of the past century. It outlasted the Roman Empire that first institutionalized it. It outlasted the German cities whose names it used to carry. It outlasted every ban, every renaming campaign, every revelation about what it contains. and it will probably outlast whatever you're worrying about today. 20 billion hot dogs every year, in a country that knows exactly what's in them and doesn't entirely care, because what the hot dog contains has never been the point. The point has always been what it means. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind everyday things.